the end of the day, if for nothing else, just know that every electronic device a person 25 and under uses that has an Apple symbol on it existed in Steve Jobs' brain somewhere. And it went from brain to your hand. And if he can do that, so can you. So can you. If you'll believe in yourself and teach yourself, you can be trusted with you and with your dreams.
Learning to swim is about learning from others. Be the author of your own story, not a character in somebody else's story. Get inspired by others to take action. Learn how to set goals to exceed your own expectations. So often the answer that you are looking for is right in front of you. On Learning to Swim, we highlight those answers through storytelling. I want to welcome Cornelia Shipley to Learning to Swim today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Cornelia, although we may get into, she's got so many different things that I want to talk to you about, so I'm super excited. For starters, you are the CEO of 3C Consulting, and what I like is that you're committed to helping companies and professionals retain and advance mission critical talent. So I want to definitely circle back to that in a little bit, but I find so juicy and really interesting. You are an author. You have a book that's called Design Your Life: How to Create a Meaningful Life, Advance Your Career, and Live Your Dreams. Again, this is something I'm so excited about because both of us being in the consulting field, I feel like we're always kind of addressing that both from our own companies, right, in our own lives and our clients. And the other piece, you've lived in lived or traveled in 6 of the 7 continents. I think travel always brings such incredible perspective to just everything that we do. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. I so appreciated the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just start first with 3C Consulting. So do the 3 C's stand for something?
They absolutely do. They absolutely do. So the three C's stand for clarity, capability, and capacity. And in our opinion, they're the 3 things that organizations need most to be able to deliver on their mission and their objectives.
Oh, I like that. That's great. And so how long have you had, when did you start 3C Consulting?
No, I started 3C Consulting really out of necessity based on a life event back in 2006. So I was the HR leader for an organization, and I was living in New Mexico at the time. And my parents both got very sick. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. My father had a stroke and actually went to sleep and didn't get medical care for more than 12 hours.
Oh gosh.
And so at that point, living, two planes away was not going to work for me and for my family. So I left my job in corporate America in October of 2006, and I started working with our first corporate client 2 weeks later on the 14th of November. So I took 2 weeks off and went to work 2 weeks later back in Michigan while I was still helping to care for my parents. And those 2 stories worked out fine. My mother did recover from breast cancer 100%. She did go on to pass 5 days after our wedding in 2012.
Wow.
And my mother lived actually another 14 years actually after his stroke.
Oh my goodness.
And passed away from COVID back in April of last year. But he had been diagnosed with dementia. So we had started to lose him prior to his death. So my husband and I met because I started this business. So, I know it's always interesting how life kind of evolves for people. And so I met my husband because I hired him to actually design our web presence. And so that's how we met. And we've been married. It'll be 9 years in September.
Well, congratulations. That's a great founding story. I love that.
Yeah.
That is really
how it happened. Had my parents not got sick, we wouldn't have 3C Consulting. And I
Oh, Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, talk to me about what mission critical talent looks like to you.
It's really interesting because we actually let our clients define what they deem as mission critical. Typically, in most organizations, it is either technical talent. So if you think about the example I always use is Procter and Gamble and the product Olestra, which they were trying to make for
Hmm.
a 30-year project, and they were trying to get it so we could all eat potato chips and not get fat. The people who were on that project were mission critical people, right? You don't want to lose these scientists who are trying to create this formulation. So that's what I mean when I say technical talent. And the next typical bucket is typically enterprise wide talent. So that's typically people at the director level and above who either directly lead or report to a person who directly leads a P&L in the organization, or who are in the C-suite of the organization. And then the third bucket is typically either early career, high potential talent that needs development, or
Hmm.
historically marginalized talent that needs development. And so those are typically the mission critical talent pools that we typically work with.
Well, when you and I spoke, I think it was a week ago now, and we are, for full disclosure, we are new acquaintances, and I hope to become better friends. And we'd met through LinkedIn, so a plug for LinkedIn. And
And a woman who wound up having a LinkedIn meeting, right? She just pulled a group of women together and said, let's come and have a conversation. And you and I happened to be a part of that discussion.
yes, and and I will say that I have had some amazing connections through LinkedIn this past year. So it's incredible. I know there's a lot of junk on LinkedIn too, but hang in there, people, because there's still some good stuff. So I want to bring up, because you gave me so much to think about, and I so appreciated our conversation, because I was asking about your work within the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space around programs, trainings, assessments. And so we know that this is now something that is top of mind for every organization. One thing that you and I talked about, and maybe you can talk some more about it, both in terms of the work that you do, and just also what you've seen kind of across your experience, is, this is this type of work has not really been successful. It's and it is something that very few organizations have gotten right. So, like, why is that, and what do you think is there kind of one missing ingredient that you feel like could really create some meaningful and sustainable success within this? And how would you define success um, for this topic? I know those are big questions. So
Those are definitely big questions. She's like, we're not going to softball you, Cornelia. We're going to just dive right on in there. So I think the first thing I would say is, and it's really interesting that you asked me this question. I just spent part of the morning this morning with a group of HR leaders out in California. Thank you, Zoom, in the middle of a pandemic, who are all trying to figure out some of these issues, right? And so the first thing I would say is that every organization is in a different place on their DEI journey. And the worst thing you can do is have expectations in the organization well beyond the capability of that leadership team or the capacity of that culture. So it doesn't make sense if this organization has never had a diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging conversation to now suddenly say, if you do this laundry list of cuckoo things that you could do, we're going to fire you, right? Like you can't make that huge leap, right? That's not fair to the capacity of your people. So the way it looks in our clients is different with every client because they're in a different space for their journey. I think that, the conversation we typically start with leadership is to say, let's have an honest dialogue about the fact that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is fundamentally one of the few initiatives in your corporation which you've had going on for years and you've been okay with it not delivering. So let's unpack why that is. And again, that answer looks different for every organization.
Oh, I bet.
Right? So that helps us get to this notion on a map of you are here. Like, where is your starting? And what's the history around what happened with diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization? How has it been received historically? If you happen to be in the news in the last 24 months, why were you in the news? What is it that your organization is trying to do now? And so you can't, in my opinion, go on this journey without real clarity around why the organization believes they haven't made the strides that they may have claimed that they wanted to make. Right?
So yes, and I appreciate that because I do feel like it is, you're right. It's going to be very unique to each organization, both in terms of what they have done, what they've, not done, and how it's been received, and also how it's been perceived by the employees themselves. So let me ask you, because I have been in many conversations lately, both with colleagues and clients about this very same topic. And so, so I end up hearing kind of two things that really strike me that are on opposite ends of the spectrum, I feel like, in a way. And one of them is from people of color, people who feel like they have been marginalized and excluded, and not, and that they are kind of having to swim upstream in an organization that doesn't practice any of these tenets of diversity or equity or inclusion, belonging, and so it's, there is this sense that there's kind of this new momentum around addressing these issues and concerns, and really maybe some hope for significant change, and there's an impatience, and rightly so. I just, I hear that, and it totally makes sense to me. I'd be impatient too. So, and then on the other side, I'm really, I'm really deeply troubled because, and I feel a little emotional over this, is also hearing people within organizations say, "Gosh, every conversation now is about racism and is about this, and really how much more do we have to do on this?" And sometimes I don't even know where to start in that moment. But is this something, are you kind of hearing the same thing, or and what do you talk to me about this?
The nation is in an interesting place, right? As a country, we're at a place where I think people say don't talk about politics, but I'm going to for a minute, right?
You can talk about anything you want here.
Well, we have half of the country who voted Republican and half the country who voted Democratic. And and the problem for organizations is that these two groups fundamentally disagree. And when you overlay things like the results of Netflix's I think it's called The Social Dilemma is the name of the on Netflix, and you understand that we're not all operating off of the same even general information.
Right.
And it makes perfect sense why you would have somebody in a room who's like, I'm over this conversation and why can't people get over it? Who hasn't seen that, last week 12 Asian Pacific, or not 100% sure of what the total number is now, of Asian Pacific Americans were attacked on the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that happened last week. You know,
Right.
whom was killed by a police officer who had their neck on the person's throat, just like George Floyd. And so if you don't have that kind of data, it's easy to say, I'm over this conversation, right? So you never know why people are saying what they're saying would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that organizations have to get to the place where they're ready, willing, and able to set clear expectations in alignment with their organization's values about what is and is not okay. And they're at a crossroads. I was talking about this morning. You know, organizations are at a crossroad to answer the question, can everybody work here?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the problem is, from a brand equity perspective, for the brand itself, if you say everyone can work here and then someone does something in the media, you have to instantly, or organizations have made the decision at this particular juncture, to immediately distance themselves from that employee. That has never happened in the history of this country. And so we're just at a different place. And you're absolutely right. People of color, in particular, Latinx and African American folks, to be more specific, and now we've got these issues around the Asian American community, have said, we are no longer waiting. So now what's happening is you have the cancel culture, the ability of people on the internet to go find, you know, Amy Cooper, who works at Franklin Templeton, who, you know, 10 minutes after her, you know, video goes viral, she no longer has her job. And, you know, I think about the woman who 2 years ago was a PR person on a flight to Africa, and she made a disparaging comment. The flight was, I think, 16 hours. She got off the plane with no job in 16 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so organizations have made it very clear, if you tarnish our brand, you can't work here anymore. They then owe it to their employee base to say, here's what that means.
Right.
Things, we're going to fire you because you've tarnished our brand. Right?
Yeah.
Part of the conversation that hasn't happened, though, is how are the Amy Coopers of the world showing up in your organization? How are they managing people's performance reviews and managing people's promotions and giving them opportunity and feedback? Those are the conversations that organizations aren't having, that's preventing them in large part from actually meeting their goals. Because what happens is, if you take a look, and I showed the videos today of Amy Cooper and Lisa Alexander, and we talked about the fact that these people were lying. Right? You like, here's what they said, and here were the facts of the matter. And so those kinds of things happening, the question becomes, what does that mean for your culture? What does that mean for the assumptions you've been making about your management when you have signs and evidence that say, in the face of otherism, whether it is an Asian American, an African American, an LGBTQ person, there's not the same level of respect or honesty or integrity. What do you want to do about that as an organization? And the organization have to make a decision. And the decision that they've been making is to just simply say, we're cutting bait with this person, without necessarily unpacking, what does that mean for your culture? What did Amy Cooper instill in her organization? Lisa Alexander was a business owner. What was it like for people to work in her company? If you're an HR leader, what does that mean for the culture? What does that mean for how you think about what you do to salvage this brand? Last week had no social media activity, because I went and checked in preparation for my speech this morning, right? So it's a really critical issue that companies have to just make a decision, right? It's not, I'm not here to say you should do one thing or the other. I'm saying you have to decide.
Right.
You have to decide.
Right. Exactly. Well, thank you. I so appreciate your viewpoint on this. And so thank you for sharing that. I do want to pivot a little bit and make sure that we talk about your book.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear how that came about, and how it continues to inform how you build your business and how you spend your time and all of the above.
Yeah, so this concept of called Design Your Life actually started when I was living in Australia. Um, if any of the listeners or you have been to Australia before, you know that the lifestyle in Australia is very different than it is in the United States. It's very much a no worries attitude, and the pace of life is very, very different. And as a part of that experience, I started asking myself as a graduate student who was getting a degree in strategic planning, what would it mean for me to actually plan my life out? Like, what would that look like? And so I started like looking at the tools of strategic planning and thinking about incorporating them. And, I started this draft in Australia, and then I put it away for several years. And then when I got 3 months before, 3 months before we got married, I said I was going to write this book. And I reached out to my wonderful editor, Sophronia Scott, who's an award-winning author and a Harvard literary grad. And I talked to her, and we agreed that we wouldn't start writing the book until after my wedding. The reason for that was because I was like, I'm going to be a different person. And you don't understand how marriage, like literally from the time you walk up the aisle to the time you walk down the aisle, changes you.
Right.
You don't, but I was smart enough to know that I would be changed. I didn't know that 5 days after my wedding, my mother would have passed. I wasn't anticipating that. And, what I learned in those 3 weeks was that I really was living my own definition of success, and that I had designed my life. Because I was off for 3 weeks, nothing happened to my business. Our clients were still well served. I was able to be present with my husband, who had just lost his mother-in-law, and my father, who had just lost his life partner of 57 years.
Yeah.
So, at that point, it was very clear to me that my definition of success, which has been for the last at least almost 20 years, to be able to be present in the moment for what matters most in that moment. That's my definition of success. And so when my mother died, I was living my definition of success because I was able to be present in the moment for what mattered in that moment. This moment, what matters most is me talking to you. So my phone is off, my door is closed, my husband knows not to bother me, right? Like it's about knowing what matters most in the moment. And so for me, how that informs the book evolved to me really talking about a couple of key things. How do we think about reward and recognition for what we want in our life? How are we defining success? And, if it's a closet full of Birkin bags and red bottoms, have at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Got to be clear about what it is. And what do you need from a personal branding perspective to be able to actually be the person who can achieve what you said you want to create for yourself? And so I talk about those topics in the book, and I still do. We do workshops around that. We have a master class called the Life Design Master Class, which is open to the public. We do internal programming with organizations around personal branding because we take a very different approach to personal branding. One of the questions I always ask our classes is, how many of you have a personal branding statement? And everybody's always like, me. And I'm like, great. And how many of you have been asked to share it ever? And they're like, yeah, never. And I'm like, right. That's what we're not going to do today. Craft your personal branding statement because you're never going to use it. Right. So I think it's just, we come from a very practical point of view about things like that. Right. We take a contrarian, very practical point of view around how you navigate your career, how you network with people, which we talk about in the book.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, it's funny. I don't know. I can't remember if we had talked about this, but that is very similar to something that I do with a lot of my workshops is, yes, these words that just become wallpaper, like success and failure, right? And also, so what I want to ask you now is, what would, one of these wallpaper words is resilience or grit, right? It's all the things. So what is your definition of resilience, and can you talk about an instance where you've been able to kind of live into your definition, or maybe an instance that informed the crafting of your definition?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think for me, I don't really like the word resilience.
Well, good.
I don't like it. And it's really interesting because I'm speaking at a conference for an organization, and part of their theme is on resilience, and we're doing a fireside chat about the topic. And I'm going to share the same thing with them. And it's because I don't think, I mean, I think life is designed such that things happen to us, which are put in our path to ultimately make us a better person, and are there as part of, of our life curricula for what we were supposed to learn on our journey while we're here. And so what you need to get over what you're experiencing already lives inside of you. That's my opinion. And so this concept of resilience, I mean, I think, the way I would describe it is it's your bounce back muscle, right? It's about how much ability do you have to bounce back. And I would say that depends on what's happening. I will tell you, I was incredibly close to my mother. And when she died, I told my husband all I wanted to do was crawl in the closet and not come out. And my husband was like, go in there. I was like, no, 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 no. If I go in there, I will not. I already knew if I went in there, I would not come out.
Yeah.
When my father died at 5. I got the phone call just before 6 a.m. on the 1st of April. I had a client meeting that afternoon. I still had the client meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I told the team that I was working with that my dad had passed that morning. And they all went into a tizzy. They were like, oh my God, why were you here? Like, are you okay? And I was like,
Right.
I'm fine. I mean, I miss my father. I miss my mother. I'm sad that they're both gone. And in that moment, what mattered most was my commitment to these people. There was nothing I could do about the fact that my father was in a hospital 1,500 miles away from me and had passed away. There was something I could do about this team who was in crisis, who I was hired to support. And so I think when you think about being resilient, it's really a question of, do you have what you need to deal with what life is going to throw at you? And my answer is you absolutely do. Otherwise, it wouldn't be thrown at you.
Well, and I would agree with you very much so. What I find, I think particularly with younger people, and in part learning to swim, is hopefully going to be reaching out to folks who are kind of looking and questioning what particularly their professional journey, what it all means, and the fact that in my experience it hasn't always been linear, and also saying yes to things that you may not fully understand why they are interesting to you. But what I agree with you that it is something that we have. What I do see is that there is a maybe an inability to recognize that or trust that for certain individuals, that the kind of the trusting of themselves. And is there anything that in your book or in your work that you do that addresses something like, or do you even see that? Would you agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree that it's a trust issue. And I think that fundamentally people teach themselves all the time that they can't trust themselves
Yeah.
with themselves, right? They have designed their life in such a way where they are constantly breaking their word to themselves, which then means you can't trust your own intuition. And so part of what I would say to your audience is you've got to start to institute the discipline of honoring your own word to yourself, because then you can start to know, oh, I can get over this. Oh, I can honor this commitment I made. Oh, I can achieve A, B, or C. The challenge comes when you have said, I want to lose the last 10 pounds. I'm not going to eat the second cupcake. And you go and you eat the second cupcake. And because what that does to you, in addition to putting on whatever amount of weight it's going to add to you, more importantly, it teaches you that it's okay for you to break your word with the most important person in your life, yourself. So yeah, there's a really great book I'm looking at it on my shelf up here. Iyanla Van Zant wrote, and it's called, I want to make sure I get the title right. It's called Trust, Mastering the Four Essential Trusts. And she talks about trust with yourself, trust with other people, trust with God. And then there's one more in the book. I'm in the middle of reading it right now. And so I think it's important that you understand, if you believe that the world is an unsafe place, if you believe that, the story that someone's told you about your potential based on what they needed and the role that they needed you to play in your family, and what was happening to you at the time, if you believe that, you're going to live up to or down to whatever that story was.
Right.
And so it's just important that people get really clear. You get to say, right? It's all made up anyway.
Right.
Tell young people enough that, your imagination matters. And what you imagine is what you're going to create. Just ask Steve Jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
He imagined Apple computers. And I'm sitting here in front of a 27-inch iMac talking to you right now with a 13-inch MacBook Pro sitting over here, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, if for nothing else, just know that every electronic device a person 25 and under uses that has an Apple symbol on it existed in Steve Jobs' brain somewhere. And it went from brain to your hand. And if he can do that, so can you. So can you. If you'll believe in yourself and teach yourself, you can be trusted with you and with your dreams.
Well, I think I'd so appreciate how that's so well said. Just the concept of, or not even just the concept, but the application of true integrity, and keeping the agreements that you make with yourself, and how important that is. And yeah, I will be, I love every time that I've spoken with you. I know that I always have something that I'm going to think about for a while to come. And if you get me the name of that book, I'll put it in the notes for the episode. So I want to ask you, okay, you've mentioned a book that you're reading right now. I grew up reading a lot as a child, and so I wanted to ask you, was there a book that you read as a child or young person, or perhaps a story that was told to you, by a family member that really still resonates with you today?
That's a really good question. So I think the book that I own that means the most to me is a book that my mother gave me when I graduated from college, from undergrad. And it's a book by Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places We Go, right? It's a very popular graduation gift, regardless of what institution you're graduating.
Right.
But I think that book really does kind of talk to and speak to the things we've been talking about today. I think that you said that, and you asked about a story, and I think the story that comes up for me relative to people's life and career is the story my father. It was an interaction I had with my dad. People were at this time asking me what I wanted to be when I grow up. And my father said to me, well, tell them you want to be a philanthropist. And I had to be like 4. I mean, like, this was not, I was not a fully baked human by any stretch of the imagination. And so I said, well, Dad, what's a philanthropist? And he said, it's a person who has so much money, they give it away. And I was like, I want to do that. Sure. Sign me up. Where do I sign? And so, that was something that very much informed my life and informed his life. As a family, my father went off and started a charter school. We have a family foundation where we give scholarships to graduates of that academy that has over 1,500 students in it. And so absolutely, that's a story that's still to this day. I think about what are the philanthropic ways that I want to be engaging with with my world. And I don't know, had I not been asked that question and not had, had that conversation with my dad when I was 4. I did learn how to spell philanthropist pretty quickly after that, though.
I was going to say.
So yeah, so those are the two. Those would be the two things. And I would say the book right now that I read out of almost every morning is the book by Raymond Hollywell called Working with the Law. And that's a mindset book. It's about the several of the universal laws that we all operate under, and most of us don't understand.
Oh, well, that sounds like a good recommendation too. Excellent. So, also thinking about back when, I always like to ask my guest, what was your very first? So, like either your very first job or the very first task that you performed that you actually there it was transactional where you got paid for it.
So my first, my first legal job or my first job?
No, just your first one. I think the statute of limitations is over, so I think we're okay here.
I think we're okay. So my first job, I was actually an assistant in a beauty salon. Was my very first job. I was like 13 or 14 years old. And this was a time where, for those in the African American community, they'll get a kick out of this. The rest of your audience is going to be like, what is she talking about? But this was a time when the Jerry curl was in.
Mm-hmm.
Activator to do this chemical process on a person's hair. And so my responsibility in the salon was to dispense the right amount of activator to each of the stylists for that style. That was my job. And I got paid every day to come in and do that job. And then my first W-2 job was scooping ice cream at Baskin Robbins.
Oh,
that was my first W-2 job.
Yep, that was that. Not at Baskin Robbins, but that was my first W-2. It was called Fruzenglage. It was supposed to be like take over Haagen-Dazs, which it never did. And yes, scooping ice cream. But I love, so that sounds like that would have been so fun to work in the beauty salon. Because I'm just thinking, like, you probably heard conversations and just, I'm thinking that would have been my dream job, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now as an adult person, actually just pre-COVID, my husband and I were talking about opening a salon.
Really?
COVID happened, so we didn't make that investment. But yeah, it's and I don't know that I would open a salon as much as I think at this point I'd open a spa. But yeah, your tastes change as you get older.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, no, it was really interesting, and you're absolutely right. I heard some interesting conversations. I met some amazing people, and saw all walks of life of people in that salon. The salon was in a nice part of town, but it attracted all types of people, and so it was fascinating to see these women's attitudes and interests and the way that they comported themselves, and it was fascinating.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, a full-on introductory to cultural, norms and mores and all sorts of stuff. The other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about was, so you mentioned in your bio that you have lived or traveled in 6 of the 7 continents. So I'm guessing, is Antarctica the only place you haven't been?
The only place I haven't been, although I used to actually do staffing for one of my jobs, sending people to support the base in Antarctica. So
wow.
I had a connection, but I didn't actually live there.
Oh gosh. So where else have you lived besides Australia?
So Australia is the only other place I've lived.
Okay.
My MBA program, I spent 3 weeks in Asia. I went to Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, Taipei, and Hong Kong. For our honeymoon, we were in Africa. So we did South Africa as part of our honeymoon. And when I was 2 years old, my parents took me to Germany.
Oh my gosh.
I think that covers everything. And I've been to Latin America, like that's, and I've been to Canada. I mean, North America, South America, like.
Yeah.
Right.
You've done that. Yeah. So I'm curious, at 2 years old, what was the trip to Germany about?
So my godparents were part of an interracial marriage. My godfather, who's passed on, was Caucasian, and my godmother's African American. And my godfather was a part of the United States Army.
Okay.
My godmother actually was a civilian employee in the Army for a while, and they were stationed in Germany. And so,
Okay.
So when I was 2, we went over to go visit my godparents.
Oh, that's so fun. So yes, we are still in the midst of COVID, but with kind of the hope that things will open up. Where's your next trip to?
So we have a new niece. Who was born on the 27th of January, and we've already gone to see her once. It's about a 10-hour drive with no traffic. We were talking about that before we started today about
yes.
It's been nice to travel with no traffic. So I'm 100% sure we'll be going back to Michigan to go see our niece. I think for me, I am, I need to go be on some water. So, I live in Georgia, which has some lakes, but not an ocean near it. About 5 hours to get to the ocean. So I would say some ocean landing somewhere. But we haven't even started looking, and we're grieving. We take an annual ski vacation. We don't ski, we snowmobile, but we take an annual winter vacation at Christmas. We haven't done that this year. And I'm having a hard time because the first time I was on a plane, I was 6 months old. So this is actually the longest time in my entire life that I have not been on a plane.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Say that again.
Almost 50 years.
Wow.
This is the longest I've not been on a plane in almost 50 years.
That's incredible. Oh my goodness. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been so great touching on these different topics. I do have one more question for you. Do you have another book that you're thinking about writing?
That's a funny question. So I actually am working on my PhD, which means that the dissertation will likely become a book. And my research actually goes back to my comments about Steve Jobs. It's all about how thoughts become things. And so I'm in the research phase now, and so yeah, so we'll see how the paper goes, and then I have 2 papers left for my PhD, and then once those 2 papers are written, Sophrony and I will sit down and figure out how to make a book out of that.
Oh my gosh, well, I can't wait. I'm sure that's just a working title, but I love even the I like how thoughts become things.
We haven't figured out a title yet. We haven't. It's just that's what the book is about. It's about something. So we'll see.
Oh goodness. Well, good luck and stay well, and we will chat soon, I'm sure.
You too. Well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute blast, and enjoy the beautiful California weather. I'm mildly jealous.
It is pretty spectacular right now. It's about 80 degrees.
Yeah, so it's not bad here in Georgia either, but I'd much rather be able to go down to the beach and hang out for a couple of hours. So enjoy that. And
thank you so much. Our goal is to inspire others and share stories to find meaning in your daily life. Let go of the traditional norms and be yourself at home, work, and beyond. The awareness of bright spots and blind spots is a performance-enhancing tool that you can apply to your life and to your organization today.